Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the first panel of the Organized Intelligence 25 conference. Our panel is on faith, ethics, and AI. My name is Fred Axelgard, and Medler has kindly involved me. I'm in way over my head, but as an open water swimmer, that's just fine, Medler. Our hope this morning is to help set the tone for the 2 days of discussion that we'll have here. The purpose is to illustrate the wide range of perspectives that are at play on this issue. The legal complexities of dealing with AI are vast. The role of state and local leaders is key if citizens are to play a meaningful role in shaping how AI impacts our society. And AI poses a fundamental challenge for ethics and human identity. Can the faith-based community hope to have an impact there? Our three panelists will endeavor to cover this challenging landscape, exploring key perspectives that are needed to guide the development and oversight of AI. I'll introduce the three panelists at this point and then just count on them to pick up at the appropriate moment in time. Julie Slater Crane will address the evolving legal landscape of AI governance, examining the legal frameworks that define accountability and governance in AI systems. She is a shareholder in the law firm of Curtin McConkie, with over a decade of experience in data privacy and data protection law, a trusted advisor on international data transfers and transactional privacy risk. Also at the forefront of emerging technologies, Ms. Crane is guiding clients through the rapidly evolving landscape of AI regulation, advising on minimizing risk when building or deploying AI solutions, conducting AI risk assessments, and developing compliance programs under global frameworks, such as the European Union's AI Act. Derek Monson will address the role of state and local actors in building trust and accountability in AI policy. He is Chief Growth Officer at the Sutherland Institute, working to advance public policy that promotes the values of faith, family, and freedom, and helping to shape Utah law and policy into an example for the nation. Mr. Monson is an active figure in the public policy conversation in Utah, providing expert analysis and commentary in policy areas that include education, family, elections, religious freedom, and civic institutions. He has published scholarly articles as well as policy commentary in Utah and national news outlets. Mariana Richardson, my colleague, will address how multi-faith and interfaith efforts can foster ethical dialogue and collaboration in the age of AI. This will deal with the possibilities for faith-based collaboration to build moral grounding and promote ethical dialogue. She serves as adjunct professor in management communication at BYU's Marriott School of Business and on the International Advisory Council at the J. Reuben Clark Law School's International Center for Law and Religion Studies. She also serves as Director of Communications for the G20 Interfaith Forum, has for several years. And the G20 Interfaith Forum is an annual platform to provide faith-based input on global issues to G20 leaders. It's a pleasure to welcome all of you here and all of you. And Julie, if you'll start us off.
Okay. Am I on? Okay, great, thanks. So there's a common misconception out there that AI is being deregulated. We see it in the headlines, in the administration's statements, in narratives that are published and pushed by big tech and by lobbyists. But the truth is, you can't deregulate a fast-moving technology that hasn't yet been fully regulated. Instead, what we're seeing is that the opposite is happening. The legal landscape for AI is very rapidly developing, both in the US and internationally. Existing laws govern AI. There are laws on consumer protection, privacy, intellectual property, anti-discrimination laws that are being used to apply to AI, but there's also a lot of emerging frameworks out there. Lawmakers are proposing AI-specific laws at an extraordinary pace. In the US alone, we've gone from 191 AI-related bills in 2023 to over 700 in 2024 and more than 1,000 in 2025. It's a lot to keep up with. Globally, over 69 countries have proposed more than 1,000 AI-related measures by early 2025, and that's not even including the rest of this year. In fact, as I was sitting in the audience, I got an alert today that Hungary just passed their AI law, so it's moving very, very fast. So this is not a moment of deregulation, it's a moment of escalating regulation. As we look at the regulatory frameworks that are emerging, we're really starting to see two key different approaches. There are comprehensive AI laws that are broad frameworks that govern all AI activity. The EU AI Act, the European Union's AI Act, is being considered kind of the gold standard. It was the first one out there. Part of it is already effective. It has staggered implementation beginning in February and then in August, and more of it will become effective next year. And similar frameworks are emerging in South Korea, has a comprehensive AI law, El Salvador, Peru, Vietnam, and then EU member states like Italy, and then again today, Hungary are starting to also pass their own AI implementation laws on top of the EU AI Act. So that's kind of the one category of comprehensive AI laws that are being passed. In the second category, we have more targeted or sector-focused laws. For example, in Utah, our AI laws are focused on licensed professionals. In Colorado, they focus on automated decision-making in high-risk sectors like education, healthcare, employment. California has differing laws. Some of them focus on transparency or regulating frontier AI models, the big AI companies. Tennessee has a law focusing on publicity rights. Texas addresses bias. China has extensive regulations on labeling and transparency. And from all of this, we see, as mentioned earlier, my background is in privacy, but we really see that AI regulation is starting to follow a fairly similar path as privacy law did, only on a much more accelerated pace. Before, when you look at privacy, GDPR is the EU's seminal privacy law. Before that was passed, few took notice of privacy. It was always interesting to me because I practiced privacy back then, but Europe already had a privacy directive that had many similar requirements to GDPR, but because it had no teeth in it, nobody cared. No one worried about enforcement. Then came GDPR with real penalties. Suddenly, organizations were faced with multi-million-dollar or euro fines, and in the case of Google, 1.2 billion, and compliance became a priority. Many countries started to copy GDPR, but the US lagged behind. We're seeing the same thing happen with AI, but on fast forward. The EU AI Act already has strong enforcement provisions, which there are fines up to 35 million euros or 7% of global revenue, whichever is greater. Other governments, including the US, are right behind, so this time the US is not lagging behind. They're passing their own AI laws with real accountability. Lawmakers are trying not to repeat the same mistakes of privacy law, where big tech pushed compliance burdens away from themselves and onto their customers. Instead, what lawmakers are doing is they're regulating the entire value chain. That's very important now because the AI market is consolidating very quickly, which we heard earlier today. Until recently, AI was more democratized. Data scientists would build their own models and control how they were trained and used. But today, foundation models from companies like OpenAI and Google dominate the landscape. A growing number of tools rely on those few models, putting enormous influence into the hands of a small group of tech giants. That's why new AI laws are regulating the entire value chain. And what I mean by that is they're regulating everyone from developers, deployers, and users alike. If customers must comply, then that will force big tech to comply. So the timing of everything really matters here. Enforcement of the EU AI Act and similar laws will really start to take place next year and more likely even in the year after. We're not seeing that enforcement quite yet. But the issue is that if an organization adopts AI too quickly without proper safeguards, that could create serious inertia in a direction that's hard to reverse, making it much harder to put controls in place when compliance does become mandatory and when those fines are in place. With these new AI laws, we are starting to see some core principles emerge across jurisdictions. Many of them are concerned about the exact same types of things. Human rights are at the top of the list, protecting individuals from harmful AI impacts on their beliefs, their dignity, and their reputation. Another key principle is non-discrimination and bias mitigation. The legislators want AI to avoid unfair outcomes. Transparency and explainability is a key principle where users should know that they are interacting with AI and understand its logic. Privacy and consent are still in play, and there's a lot of overlap between privacy and AI laws. Prevention of manipulation and deception, especially against deep fakes, and safety and human oversight, and the importance of keeping humans in the loop. What makes AI laws unique, however, when compared with other frameworks, is that they are outcome-centric and human-centered. They don't just regulate how the technology works, they regulate how it affects people, and that's where the real harm can occur. As members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, we bring a distinctive moral perspective and spiritual lens to this conversation. We believe that humans have inherent dignity created in God's image. We have a unique perspective on truth and revelation. We believe that truth, accuracy, and integrity matter. From that foundation, we can affirm AI's positive potential to uplift humanity, advocate for ethical development and transparency so people know when they're interacting with AI and can check for errors and deception, and we can champion accountability and human oversight, asking companies to make clear how AI systems work, what data they use, and how decisions are made. Our faith gives us both optimism and responsibility to help ensure that AI serves humanity by promoting truth and light rather than misinformation and deception. So what can we do? We can support AI transparency laws. We can encourage legislators and companies to adopt legal frameworks requiring clear disclosure about when AI is being used. We can ask for opening of black boxes. We can push for AI companies to provide understandable information about how AI systems make decisions and what models and training data are being used. We ourselves can use AI intentionally and ethically. We've heard a lot about that so far today, and I'm sure we'll continue to hear more. And importantly, we can engage in the conversation. Our faith community can bring a moral voice to this technical field. We can help ensure that AI treats people as ends and not means, and that human rights are respected and protected. Let's help shape not only what AI can do, but how it should do it in ways that honor our divine worth, uphold truth, and reflect the very best of humanity. Thank you.
Derek?
Well, thank you for the chance to be here. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you all. I work at Sutherland Institute, which is a think tank here in Salt Lake City. And we work on public policy in the state of Utah, the broader region, and occasionally in Washington, D.C. So as part of that, you occasionally get the opportunity to get up in front of large groups of people and speak. And I'm always reminded of surveys of people's greatest fears, right? And number one is always public speaking. And then number two is death. And a relatively famous comedian who I'm sure you'd all know made a joke on that, saying that if you were going to be at a funeral, it means you'd rather be in the casket than giving the eulogy. And it just reminds me of that, that feeling every time you get up, you get a little jitters and things. But I'm here to talk about really just 3 points about about governance of AI and how that can create, done right, can be sustainable, build trust, and be done ethically. So first point is that as advocates, thought leaders, religious leaders, or policymakers, sustainable governance and public policy around AI, and again, by that, I mean policies that cultivate trust around legitimate and beneficial uses of AI, which for me, I'm kind of an AI optimist, a technology optimist, and so that's kind of the perspective I'm coming from. So sustainable governance around AI requires us to recognize the validity of perspectives that may not be our own. A couple of examples, right? A parent concerned about their child's mental health and the skills they're developing in school and with AI tools being available there. Or another perspective just being the fact, kind of recognition of the fact that AI is already embedded in our lives in many beneficial ways in how we communicate in our health systems, in our education systems. And a third perspective, I'm just kind of pulling a few out right here, that one of the big questions on AI is maybe less, is it going to be there? I mean, it's already there. It's whose interests is it serving? Is it serving the interests of free societies or of authoritarian systems? And recognizing the validity of competing perspectives, right? A parent may not care so much about those other two perspectives, or someone who really cares about national security may not think as much about those other two perspectives that I noted. But recognizing the validity of competing perspectives is inherently trust building. And it will help us to create the kind of consensus around AI governance that's going to be lasting and produce the most good, rather than be subject to a back and forth politically, and it's never really stable, which isn't great for anybody, and usually isn't actually going to produce anything in terms of governance. That is maybe wanting that will produce the things that we all want it to produce. The second point, ethical AI governance won't grow from, it's related to the first point, won't grow from shouting down or ignoring perspectives that we disagree with. That will just divide and sow distrust. And that's the kind of environment where probably no AI governance policies will move forward. And the ones that do will, in a free society like ours, where we require people to actually kind of willingly follow policies and follow the law, by undermining trust in those things, it will make them less effective. And so it won't actually accomplish the goals of that common good that we all want. Lastly, sustainable AI governance in America will come as AI policy reflects kind of our system of federalism, where you have local, state, and federal officials that all have a distinct role. So, for instance, just to highlight a few examples, not saying this is the right way to do things, but as an illustration of that, these ideas, Congress may be creating guidelines around AI from the standpoint of national security, from interstate commerce, which is our constitutional role. State policymakers creating rules around public health and safety around the uses of AI, which is their role in our society. And local schools kind of making rules around how students actually use AI in the classroom. So there's a lot of maybe a healthy dose of cynicism or in the comments I've made about the world that we're in politically, a lot of polarization, a lot of partisan entrenchment that is preventing good things and creating a lot of harm. But I want to end on a positive note, because it can seem in the world that we're in, that we're almost powerless, it can feel, to make a change, to affect change, to do good things in the world when it comes to things that go through political processes or are subject to partisan influence. But from a Latter-day Saint perspective, the exact opposite is true. Right? We have access to the most important power to influence change and to affect change and influence people in our communities, our families, our states, and our nations. And if we will engage, if we will coordinate with and engage in the societies that we're in, whether it's around AI or any other issue for that matter, we can create the kinds of systems where things like AI will be beneficial, improving our health, our education, our personal lives, our families' lives, and protect against the greatest harms that exist out there. Thank you.
I'm going to be speaking today about interfaith efforts and the dialogue that's been going on through IF20 G20 or G20 Interfaith Forum. Just to give you a little bit of background, G20 is an intergovernmental forum of 19 countries, plus the European Union and the African Union, which is just happened 2 years ago. So yes, it's more than 20. It's quite a bit more than 20, actually, countries. But it addresses major global economic and policy issues And each year, there's a host country that selects key topics that are going to be discussed that year. And then there's specialized groups, such as Business 20, Youth 20, Women 20, that present policy papers to the G20 summit. IF20 is an informal engagement group that focuses on faith-based perspectives, especially involving religious leaders, civil society, and governmental officials that are interested in interfaith dialogue. So what I wanted to do was kind of talk to you about what happened the last 3 years since ChatGPT became a part of our international technological landscape. The first meeting was in India in 2023. India was the host country. Also realized that all of these years, this idea of technology has been a number one concern in the discussion at G20. During the 2023 year, realized ChatGPT came out in November 30th, 2022. So it was very much in everybody's minds, but they kind of didn't know what it was going to look like, what it was going to cause in terms of society. And so we had 2 different forums that year, one in New Delhi, and the other was in Pune, India. The one in New Delhi was much earlier in the year. And so at that point, the concern about artificial intelligence becoming a part of sacred religious traditions was something they weren't sure of. One, Marco Ventura, who was speaking at that conference, who is a Vatican scholar, expressed his concern about AI robots handing out the Holy Communion. And these were real concerns. Also, Pope Francis, just a few months previous, had made an official strong statement about artificial intelligence. He specifically talked about accountability, impartiality, security, and individual privacy of information. So these became talking points. But at this point in the discussion, because we really didn't know what to discuss, afterwards, Pune was about 5 to 6 months later, and the discussion changed to be more specific about the challenges that religious leaders were seeing. Specifically, it was interesting, the analogy was used to a Trojan horse, that technology, especially AI, can act as a Trojan horse, embedding values that reshape society in subtle and profound ways. Technology often alters human behavior and relationships, disrupting spiritual connections to self, others, the planet, and to God. 3 of the 4 panelists when we were having this discussion were religious leaders who also were involved in religious schools. They expressed the concern that we've already talked about, especially from Elder Kim Clark, about the influence that AI could have on students, not only spiritually, but intellectually as well. I teach at BYU, as was mentioned, and I know that we at BYU are grappling with this very same issue. Manisha Jain, who is a Hindu, but also Microsoft AI lead engineer, and also worked at Google AI, and also Meta, she made some very strong statements. The first one was that technology is advancing at such an astronomical rate that using it ethically is more important than ever before. She also used an interesting analogy of AI being like a gun. A gun is a necessary tool for society. It gets food, it protects us from evil people, and can even bring recreational enjoyment. But guns can also hurt people and cause societal chaos. Similarly, AI is a necessary tool for society. It is ubiquitous in our society. A matter of fact, I don't think we realize how much AI is being used in our daily lives. Given that, it is a huge positive for running our lives in society, but it can also be used to harm individuals and society in general. The second meeting was in Brazil, 2024. G20 was there, and we met in Brazil's capital, Brasilia. Now, at this point, a year later, ChatGPT had become a major part of the worldwide technological landscape. And we saw a different concerns began to emerge, especially with religious leaders. The forum theme that year was Leave No One Behind, the well-being of the planet and its people. Because of this focus, an issue that was highlighted during this discussion was youth, their effect by negative hate speech about religions. Tiago Alves Pinto, who is a professor at Oxford University, clarified the distinction between misinformation, which is accidental spread of inaccurate information, and disinformation, which is intentional spread of information to cause harm. Now, because controls on the prioritization of information, and there has not been an equivalent to search engine optimization in these large LLMs, there is no discrimination of the information that is placed in these general models. And because of this, there are inherent biases and hate speech that can be found in answers to queries. Angela Redding of the Radiant Foundation, actually here in Salt Lake, was there in Brazil, and she showed research illustrating the prevalence of negative portrayals of religion in media and called for more balanced and positive representations. She also made recommendations that included more research on hate speech and its negative influence on youth and society, also fostering and promoting interfaith dialogue and cooperation to counter intolerance and discrimination, and that religions can promote teaching to adults and youth especially how to be critical in their evaluation of information, especially as they read on AI platforms, and so that they can recognize disinformation. Faith leaders were also pushing for legal frameworks and international standards for information poured into LLMs, such as the Rabbit Plan of Action, which is a 6-step legal framework to determine when restrictions on freedom of expression can be applied, and also the United Nations resolutions on combating intolerance. Still, there are a lot of different opinions in religions as to how concerned should they be about AI. Medler Mima was also with us in Brazil, and he had an interesting discussion with Khushwant Singh, who is a Sikh and president of PARD, which is an interfaith nonprofit. Khushwant held the position that AI has nothing to do with spirituality and religion. He actually denounced the concern that religion should have about AI. Medler had the strong argument that religions must become involved in the AI discussion and AI policy to guard against evolving significant issues, many of which we've been discussing today and continuing tomorrow. Just to kind of underscore this, in March of 2025, the Anti-Defamation League, ADL, just came out with a very interesting study on the relationship between the Jewish religion and AI. The study reveals significant anti-Jewish and anti-Israel biases in leading large language models, such as ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, and Llama. It showed concerning responses to questions on a range of topics. Now, the third meeting happened pretty recently, and that was in Cape Town, South Africa, because G20 Summit will be the end of November in Cape Town. The forum was anchored to this African philosophy of Ubuntu, I am because we are, which shaped the ethical discourse around AI in our G20 Interfaith Forum this year. We also had a young adult 18 to 35 group IF20 meeting before the entire forum arrived. I also want to stress in terms of how many people come to these forums, and I haven't shown you all the pictures. This one was for India. We had about 3,000 people at that forum.
It's not showing, Marianne.
Oh, okay. Yay, all right. There's Pune, India at the World Dome, Peace Dome. And this was in Brazil, in Brasilia. And here we are at Cape Town. There were about 500 delegates from 50 different countries and 48 different religions that came to Cape Town with us. But these young adults that came also from all different religions, backgrounds, all different places throughout the world, they emphasized how important it is that we have intergenerational dialogue about AI use and AI governance. Their knowledge, understanding, and use of AI brought important dimensions that older generations might not have a complete grasp of. Another new viewpoint that came in this discussion was the technology gap between first world and third world countries. The global South is feeling left behind in all issues surrounding AI. I'm also going to quote Medlir on this. He was also there with us in Cape Town, and he highlighted the tensions around AI's environmental impact, noting that while AI could help achieve sustainable development goals through optimizing energy use and tracking pollution, companies like Google, Amazon, and Meta have underreported emissions from AI data centers. He warned against thinking we can innovate our way out of a crisis without addressing the root causes. Also, and this has been talked about before, but this was brought up quite a bit at Cape Town, there is a growing theological concern of AI becoming a god, lowercase g, to people. Currently, there is a God app that people can send their prayers to and get answers. But worshiping idols, as Derek and I were talking earlier, it is not something new. It is not a new problem. Think of the golden calf in the Old Testament. We have seen that before, something that we have to fight against. In conclusion, I do have 3 objectives that I think that we can do together. The first one is we cannot blame AI for our societal woes. The best way for all of us, including religious leaders, is to guard against these problems by maintaining human-to-human interactions and connections, and also promoting spiritual connections with deity through prayer and personal revelation. The second is to focus on teaching our youth about using AI as a tool and also being critical about the AI answers they receive. And the third is to promote interfaith cooperation to combat disinformation and intolerance for other religions on AI. Instead, we need to create a solution that incorporates all religions working together to fix the negativity against religious institutions in the media and AI queries. I wanted to end with just Elder Gong, who I know will be with us tomorrow, but he talked to Religions for Peace at their worldwide council in Turkey. And he said, we can be clear and help society understand that AI is not God and cannot become God. He also talked about the importance of a faith community AI evaluation for AI governance. And G20 Interfaith Forum is very supportive of both of those things. Thank you.
We have about 30 minutes for discussion. There are going to be some mics circulating. I'm going to try and start a little dialogue going here and create a little chemistry in the room, hopefully positive. Medler, let me know if I don't succeed in that regard. But I want to put a question to each one of you 3. Julie, the first one, I'll just put it under the heading of time. You warned about moving too quickly, I think, trying to regulate too much too fast before we get a full understanding of the impacts or of what we can do. Would you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, I think that time is an issue kind of both ways. We don't want to regulate too quickly, but we also don't want to implement AI too quickly. And so it's a bit of a challenge as to try to regulate something that is developing and moving so fast. One, I think, key example is agentic AI. When the EU AI Act was passed, that wasn't really a thing. And so there's not really anything out there yet. There are bills being proposed that specifically addresses agentic AI. And so the legislative process is, depending on the country, but especially in our country, it's kind of intentionally slow and deliberate. And so it can be really hard for it to keep up with a technology that is so fast moving. But then as users and consumers and businesses incorporating AI, it's tricky on that end to try to implement AI in your business and have a governance program when the law is kind of constantly shifting. And so I think that's why I wanted to focus kind of on the principles that these laws are getting at, because as opposed to trying to keep up with every law that might come up in each country, if you're a global company, which you might eventually need to do, if you focus on the broad principles that the laws are trying to address and industry standards, then you're going to be in a pretty safe spot. I often advise clients to focus on the EU AI Act, as I talked about earlier, because it's kind of a gold standard. And so far, we're seeing that the little laws that are being passed match. And so if you're willing to kind of go to that higher standard, then you're going to be kind of future-proofing yourself against all the regulation that's going to happen. But I think necessarily the regulation is going to lag behind the technology because it's moving so fast.
Okay, thank you very much. I think this kind of feeds into the next question. Derek, I want to talk to you a little bit about collaboration. You were very big on the need for engagement, and I respect that. And I think that implies a little something about time, needing the time to do that collaboration. She just talked about the moving goalpost, right? How companies can deal with that. Is there a solution potentially at the state level, at the local level, where things can move more quickly to address this issue of the rapidly evolving technology, but the slow-moving national legislation? And then say anything you'd like to about the challenge of partisanship, the climate we live in, and what how that affects the prospects for collaboration.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's important to make good policy. You need to have kind of all perspectives at least at the table. Now, no public policy is going to reflect necessarily every perspective, right? I mean, there's going to be things in our system. It's what it's designed to do. It's designed to produce consensus that has a broad level of support. That's what our Constitution does, at least when we use it the right way. And we don't try to use it that way, we usually get nothing, is kind of often what we see today. So I think there does need to be collaboration between levels of government, between the private sector and policymakers, between advocates and the private sector and policymakers. I don't know how you do that in a way that is fast. So that maybe it doesn't quite get at the solution. I think it's more just this is a function of our system, particularly when you get up to the national level. It's designed to go slow so that we don't have kind of spasms of passion that end up creating big problems. Now, maybe at a state and a local level, you can go a little faster. But even then, that collaboration, those discussions that are required simply take time. And I think, again, given kind of what's at stake, I mean, just as one kind of use example of AI that I think we all would say is good, and that potentially is put at risk depending on how we choose to govern AI. Researchers in Pennsylvania, it's either Penn State or the University of Pennsylvania, I don't remember which one, were researching the kind of antibiotic-resistant bacteria, and how do we overcome that? It's becoming an increasing problem, and if that really takes hold, we're talking, medieval times in terms of care, before penicillin was a thing, right? And they used an AI program to research the elements of snake venoms, which apparently, according to this thing I was reading, are stronger than most antibiotics today. So they overcome some of these resistance problems. And they accomplished in a matter of hours what would take human beings alone weeks and months to accomplish. So when we think about regulating the development and use of AI, if we're not thinking about those kinds of instances of how it's being used and developed, and that, again, takes time for those things to be a part of the conversation, because most people aren't thinking about everything when it comes to regulating and legislation on AI. We risk simply kneecapping those things and undercutting our own well-being, our own health, our own education, our own happiness. And what's more so, I think, to get to the second part of your question about the polarized kind of world, the biggest challenge I see in that, from the standpoint of what we're here to talk about today, is it drowns out faith-based perspectives. To the extent that they enter, they get filtered through a partisan lens. And they're not really faith-based perspectives anymore. They're simply something that partisan interests use to move a piece up the board. And so it really becomes critical, coming back to the engagement part, that we engage with those who think differently than we do. We seek to understand what their perspective is. And when you start to do that, it becomes really challenging to actually be a polarized actor. In fact, you kind of start to hate yourself if you engage in polarization after that. And rightly so, because you start to see people as human beings, and to treat them like a polarizing object is just dehumanizing. So I think there's a lot of challenge from that. But again, as we engage, with in the right ways, with humility, with respect, with love, with boldness, and all of that, I think we can, working in our families, in our communities, in our states, rise above the polarization trends and instances at very least, and then over time, kind of create a new chapter in how we do these things when it comes to AI and other issues.
Thank you very much. I want you to feel free to chime in on this next question too, if you'd like. Mariana, you talked about the role of the G20 Interfaith Forum. You spoke about Elder Gong going to Turkey to speak to the Religions for Peace. He was at the Vatican a couple of weeks ago. Should we be perceiving that there's kind of a bow wave, a meaningful surge in interfaith, if you will, recognition and collaboration on this issue? And I want to draw Medler in, because he was at several of those forums. Just in reality, what are the chances that the interfaith community, at whatever level, can actually have an impact on this, call it a dialogue, call it a policy preparation, call it policy execution? Just, anyway, Medler, hope you don't mind. I think both of you would, if you wouldn't mind commenting on that.
No, I'm 100% feel that interfaith needs to be at the table. We need to be at the table talking about governance. We need to be at the table talking about these issues. And it's interesting, back in 2022, when Pope Francis sent out that initial Vatican statement, that Vatican statement was done with Microsoft and with Google, working with the Pope to be able to bring that statement about. And so I don't think, I think the more that we can be vocal as people of faith, that number one, just like Derek was talking about, people of faith we are not against AI. A matter of fact, if anything, your example is something that we would applaud. Realize that G20 Interfaith Forum, we are for helping the world in all the different United Nations SDGs. So we don't just talk about AI, but we talk about food inequity. We talk about poverty. We talk about human trafficking. Fred's been so involved in that. But in every single one of those areas, AI can be used to help in those areas, to help solve some of these problems. And so in the interfaith conversation, we also talk about how can we use AI as a positive tool, just like you were talking about, to be able to solve some of these world problems. On the other side, though, we do need to also be a positive statement about the importance of divinity, the importance of truth, the importance of talking in an interfaith space so that all of us understand each other's points of view. All of those are so powerful. I did want to just share, just recently, just like literally 2 months ago, Pope Leo just sent out a new statement from the Vatican. And I thought this was kind of positive, going along with your comment. He said, access to data, however extensive, must not be confused with intelligence, which necessarily involves the person's openness to the ultimate questions of life and reflects an orientation toward the true and good. In the end, authentic wisdom has more to do with recognizing the true meaning of life than with the availability of data. I think that point goes right along with some of the things that we've been saying, in that wisdom still needs to be used when we use AI as a tool. And that wisdom can be divine. We can seek divine help in trying to figure out what is truth. And I think that as we do that with these wonderful tools, keeping our own divinity, keeping our own humanity, I think that is the focus of some of the interfaith conversations.
Thank you. Medler, anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, so what I say is that if you're not around the table, you're on the menu. So if we want to actually affect the, by the way, that's a Cole Durham quote. That's not mine. And so I think if we want to affect the conversation, we have to be around the table, and that was obviously the exchange from last year. There's another element here. I mean, in real terms, we have seen the impact of civil society and faith-based civil society organizations across a variety of issues when it comes to affecting the ultimate shape of regulation. International humanitarian law, international criminal law, right? These are areas that, at least professionally, I've worked on. But even just as recent as the recent discussions on the big and beautiful bill, right? That was actually the one element of that bill that was actually excised from the final version was actually the moratorium on AI regulation. Right, the administration wanted a 10-year moratorium on all regulations that actually Julie was talking about. And actually it was state and local officials, together with religious leaders, that actually put pressure between June and September of this year against the administration, and pressure on the congressional leaders to actually not have that moratorium in place. So I think those are just examples, right, that faith leaders and others can actually have a direct impact in the day-to-day discussions on AI regulation.
Thank you. You kind of took away my next question, which was how absolute is the partisan divide on issues. It doesn't appear to be absolute, that AI is along these lines.
So
Please.
I'll do a publicity for one of my students, actually. Last year, he did like research on AI regulation and congressional research. And AI legislation is overwhelmingly bipartisan. Overwhelmingly 75 to 80% support, right? And overwhelmingly defeated. So we need state and local and, like I said, civil society organizations to actually affect that conversation more.
Derek, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to comment on the moratorium that Medler mentioned, because the debate around that reflects, and then I think the public understanding around the proposal reflects a lot of the concerns that I have about polarization and again, why some of these things maybe can't go fast, and there's arguments maybe say they shouldn't go fast. So that proposal, right, the common understanding is what Medler just articulated, that it would have just preempted all moratorium and all regulation, period, end of story. It actually only would have preempted regulation if a state chose to accept a certain pot of federal funds from the government. So states actually had full authority under the terms of the moratorium that eventually got excised to not opt into that. And at the speed at which that debate happened, and which the kind of the partisan winds on both sides were blowing, that kind of understanding wasn't really possible to recognize those nuances. And if we're going to get governance right on AI, including understanding when we shouldn't regulate, right? When it's actually we should just stay out and let people, be it in the private sector, churches, other families, just kind of deal with this themselves because they're the best equipped to do it. Then we're going to have to take time, and we're going to have those conversations to recognize why that's the case, whether it's we should regulate or shouldn't regulate. The One Big Beautiful Bill was an example of kind of the opposite of that. It's the process that was available, and so that's why people were engaging in it. And I recognize that, and I understand that. We were kind of engaged in that process ourselves. But in hindsight, it's easy to see why it isn't the best process.
Thank you. I'm taking away from these last few comments that there's actually a space to work in here, both in terms of time and in terms of potential for collaboration. That's maybe more encouraging than the thought I walked into the room with this morning. Let's go ahead and turn to the audience. I'm going to take the last 5 minutes at the end to ask a question that we've talked about earlier, but please go ahead.
Sorry about that. We've been really focused on
And please, we'll keep it short, okay?
Yeah, sure. We've been really focused on output. And as we all know, there's 3 phases to AI. There's source data, the black or white box, and the output. I'd love to shift the conversation to source data and get your thoughts on potentially addressing a lot of these issues and slowing things down, focusing on how do we collect data, how do we use data, how do we allow its use, how do we educate, and where do we go from here?
Thank you very much. Who would like to?
I can
Julie,
start.
please.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think really goes to the overlap between AI and privacy, but not just personal data, but all sorts of data. And something that I think is really interesting about the EU AI Act is one of the very first requirements that came into effect back in February was AI literacy. So having people understand how to use AI. I think a part of that we're missing from that conversation, as was mentioned, is not just the use of it, but understanding how the AI works and what data it's trained on and what data it's based on, because that is really important to the conversation that we're having here today, is how does AI represent religion? And when you think about AI literacy, my own view is that there should be a requirement for religious literacy too. And that the AI, just like any other ethical standard, that just as we expect AI to handle certain issues like gender and racial issues responsibly, that we should expect AI to handle religion responsibly. And I can't remember where I heard this quote, but I heard once that if you think about most of the models, they're trained on the dregs of the internet, right? They're just looking for as much data as they can find anywhere. And so I don't love the term artificial intelligence because it's not really intelligent. We know that intelligence is light and truth. And AI is not about truth, it's a prediction engine. And my own personal view is that AI is more of a mirror. It's a mirror of the data that we put into it. It's a mirror of who we are as a people in the society. And if we can change the conversation to build AI that considers religion, considers good data in what's being trained, then the AI will have different outcomes. That's why the focus of the regulation is on bias and discrimination, because AI reflects our biases and it reflects our discrimination. But if we can, instead of just focusing on the output, which is what a lot of the laws focus on, if we can focus on how AI is being built, then that could move the needle.
Are you satisfied that that emphasis is there? Either you or Derek, are you seeing that emphasis on the source data? Is that out there in the policy discussion?
I mean, it's certainly being talked about. Yeah, I for instance, the point about anti-Semitism, being reflected in a lot of AI output, that comes back to the data that's going into it, and that's something that's being discussed. I think there's a lot of
effectively discussed. Are you convinced it's?
Yeah, no, I think it's being considered. Yeah, I'm not even sure how to measure it candidly. I mean, this is a bunch of human beings who are imperfect in a bunch of imperfect processes, So what is effective? Effective is not hurting people, I suppose. That's one measure, And but it's also, are we allowing the good things to flourish? And there might come a time when we have to choose between those things, I suppose. But I'm hoping that we can actually strike a balance and allow those good things to go out there and not be so focused on the negative that that's all we worry about. And then we just undercut all the positive we could gain from artificial intelligence.
Thank you.
I think from an interfaith perspective, too, this is a major concern, not just here in the United States, but throughout the world. This idea of, matter of fact, one statement that was made that was a little shocking that somebody made in our AI was Rachel Miner, who is very much involved in genocide. And she said, look, if we aren't more careful in terms of what kind of rhetoric and hate speech is in our AI, we risk a genocide. And that was a little shocking for people to hear, but it is something that internationally we have to realize is probably affecting, peoples around the world more than we realize. And so, and like I said, Elder Gong specifically talked about that in his Religions for Peace, about how important it is that we do talk about standards of governance for what is being put into the AI
Interesting.
LLMs.
Bob, go ahead and I'm going to make one quick point before you make your question. It's just
Quickly, and I'll say it loud. We're talking about something with a giant maw, like Charybdis or Typhon in Greek mythology, who's devouring almost everything. We're all affected by a lake out here that's drying and is in serious danger of absolutely disappearing. It will take billions of dollars to save the lake. The amount of energy that AI is taking is astronomical and will continue to take. So we've got the moral decision about the impact of something happening right here in our backyard, which will affect generations and this culture into the next century. And that seems to me to present a very serious political and moral dilemma about how do we use our resources. And if all of these people are competing with trillions of dollars for the energy to run AI, what's going to happen to something that affects our lives?
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Go ahead.
So I engage on that one a little bit because, again, this is another area where I think there's a lot of information that's not publicly understood. So, again, working in this space in policy and talking to a lot of these companies that are AI developers, and a lot of them actually want to generate new sources of energy that provide for them, and even potentially produce excess energy that goes into the kind of the grid, and they run into hurdles from kind of existing energy producers, right? Which a lot of them are monopolies. So it's easy to think, oh, AI is gonna take all the energy. We need to do all this other stuff. When if we get around the table and start talking about these things, it's going to become apparent we can actually produce even more energy with data centers in our state or in our community if we allow that to happen. And there's a lot of people who don't want to allow that to happen, right? But that's not being talked about, and it needs to be, because we can find solutions that actually are broadly beneficial if we're willing to engage the conversation and not just kind of focus on our talking points and our agendas. I'm not saying that's what you're doing. I'm just saying this is what politics is often doing nowadays.
Thank you very much. Please, it's the gentleman in the white shirt there.
In regards to regulation, ChatGPT stated recently that it's going to start allowing erotic conversation and output, et cetera, on their platform. Do these AI platforms fall under Section 230? Are they actually content providers based on how they're gathering their information? And would regulation with these platforms follow a precedent of existing social media as example platforms?
Julie? Is that a fair question for you?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think I haven't looked at that question closely, but I think that they should be. There is a big movement to, at least with respect to children, there's a lot of bills out there now to protect children against AI content that is sexual in nature. California recently passed a bill, and there's also a federal bipartisan bill. I can't remember the number, but it just came out, I think, last week. And that's kind of where the conversation is going, with a focus on children. But I like the idea of considering them content providers, because that is what AI does. It's a content generation engine. That's what it was made to do in a lot of ways. And so I think it's a really good point.
Thank you. Did you want to comment, Derek?
I was just saying, I'm not personally aware whether AI would fall under Section 230, because that's mainly for platforms that host other people's content, like social media platforms. So AI, at least on its surface, doesn't seem to qualify there. But yeah, but they're not hosting it. That's kind of what Section 230 is for. It's like a newspaper, right? You're hosting op-eds or stuff like that. And again, maybe they are under Section 230, but I'm not certain that that is accurate or not.
Thank you. I'd like to give Francesco DeLillo, he directs the church's office in Brussels for the EU, and I'd like to hear your perspective or your question, Francesco. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Mariana, yes, sorry. Mariana spoke about the concern of the developing countries being left behind. And then Professor Mema made that statement, if you are not at the table, you are on the menu. That brings me the question. We have the three major actors, EU, China, and the US, are basically going different ways when it comes to EU regulations. And disparity is evident. The divide between the developing and developed countries is evident. So in order to avoid what could become some sort of digital colonization moving forward, what do you think could be the steps to be taken so that these three giants start moving into the right direction and don't forget about the developing world?
One thing that was talked about in South Africa, there were quite a few AI experts that are there in South Africa that discussed very much about how all too often they feel like the first world countries come to them and say, oh, you poor third world countries, let me teach you how to do it. And the one thing that they said is they said, look, we are smart enough, we are intelligent enough to figure out some of our own solutions. But oftentimes what we need is help with the resources to do it. We don't need help with coming up with the solution. We need to have help with money. One of the things that was talked a lot about was the Jubilee year and helping all of these third world countries, especially in Africa, to be able to handle the debt that they're dealing with in countries. And so because of that, all of their money as a country is going into paying off their debt rather than being able to deal with any of these technological issues or anything even to help their countries have roads and take care of food issues and poverty. And so that is something that we do need to think about, is when we look at this internationally, how are we going to help third world countries to have the resources available to be able to also be a part of the AI revolution, which is positive in terms of the things that it's allowing us here in the United States to do.
Francesca, let me put a question back to you based on some of the earlier conversation. Is the Vatican, is that a centerpiece of their perspective? And Mariana, you too, Pope Leo, is his concern going to drive forward the interests of the developing world? What is your thought on that? Yeah. Just you're there in Europe. I thought you might have a.
Well, Brussels is a bit far away from Rome, but I can't really speak about where the Catholic Church is going in that regard. I can say that the representation of the Catholic bishops of Europe in Brussels is quite active on the AI topic and has submitted a number of papers on looking at the ethical aspects of AI applied to human life in general. That's okay. All I could say about it.
Thank you. My question basically, who is going to pick up the voice for the developing world? And if anybody has a thought about that, I'd be interested.
I hope that we do. That's what I'm hoping. I'm hoping that we will step up and that we will help these third world countries the way we should be. And so that is my hope.
It is a global concern, isn't it? I wanted to ask if anybody in the room wanted to try to connect the earlier addresses with this discussion. Has anybody had an aha moment here thinking, oh, Terrell said this and it connects here? Okay, am I over? Are you with us?
Yes.
Okay, please.
My name is Charlene.
Hi, Charlene.
And listening to all of this morning, I already am waiting for the final thing, which is, of course, the glory of God is intelligence. However, I have a degree in early childhood development, which and emphasis in psychology, social work, and sociology, but I also took a class in astronomy. Through all of this study, I learned a lot about at least 12 different theorists. And putting all of these theorists together, you can see the big picture of because these series were all based on observation. I don't know how the Big Bang Theory came out, but this was part of it. And at the end of one of my astronomy classes one night, there was a recent convert to the church that was all confused about what she was learning. But the thing is that these are all theories. For we know that it was God that created not only the universe and everything else, but he also created us. And so through all of this, it helps us to gain an understanding of why things are the way they are, why we are the way they are. And artificial intelligence is there to help us, but it's not there to do for us what we can do for ourselves.
Thank you very much. You know that we've had three perspectives here, and the perspective of God's intelligence being overall. It's a very good reminder. Can I just ask the three of you, if you'd like to? We have all of 12 seconds left. In your specific sphere, whether religion, state and local regulation, where is the low-hanging fruit? Where do you see opportunities for effective collaboration, constructive either regulation, discussion, interfaith work? Any thoughts about low-hanging fruit that could give us some specific reasons for hope? Julie, I'll let you go first, and Marianne, if you'll conclude.
Yeah, I think the fact that the regulation is just really moving right now and starting to move is a low-hanging fruit because we're having the conversation. It's a time where we can get involved and we can come to the table and be there and not on the menu, and we can speak up and advocate for those principles that we care about, whether that's truth, transparency, human dignity. We have an opportunity where the laws have not been passed yet. It's a moment in time where we can influence conversation. Thank
you very much. Derek?
Well, knowing that we stand between you and lunch, I'll be very brief and just say that, again, engaging in these discussions and learning about the different perspectives and the different facts that are out there, kind of discerning between what is based on real things, facts and evidence, what is based on concerns that have materialized, those kinds of things, I think, is a low-hanging fruit for anyone who wants to engage.
Thank you. And Mariana?
And I would say, too, when we find out in Doctrine and Covenants 93, it talks about the spirit of truth is of God. And I do think that we need to make sure that we keep God in this conversation, that we make sure that the idea of our combined humanity, that we talk to each other, that we understand each other, and that human-to-human connection becomes something that we do individually in our neighborhoods and our homes, but also internationally, that we go outside of our little boxes and make sure that we get to know each other. And I think in many ways that's going to counteract some of these negative things that we see with AI.
Thank you very much. As everybody who knows me well recognize that I'll probably end with a quote from the Psalms. Come, behold the works of the Lord, what desolations he hath made in the earth. He makes wars to cease unto the end of the earth. He breaketh the bow and cutteth the spear in sunder. He burneth the chariot in the fire. Be still, and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the heathen. I will be exalted in the earth. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our refuge. Thank you very much. Join me in thanking these folks.